It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano on the road, starting off 2024. It's great to have you with me. I have great feelings about 2024. I have mixed feelings about 2023. I'm actually really not very sad to see it go. But I do have some highlights about 2023 and some great expectations for 2024. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into 2024. But first, this is very fun. Instagram allows me to go live. So for the first time ever, I'm going live on Instagram, and let's see if that works. So if you see me toiling in the back on Instagram, it's because, well, uh, things are afoot. So in theory, we're live on Instagram right now. We'll see how that shakes out. But let me get right down to my guest. Who else would be better to kick off 2024 than the founder of Green Queen and the very knowledgeable Sonalie? Now, I like to say Sonalie. We'll get into that in a second because everybody else has a different. Sonalie Figueiras. You have such an interesting name. I grew up in France, so I say Sonalie, but everyone else says Sonalie. Tell me, what should it be?
Well, according to my parents, you are correct.
Okay.
Sonali is an Indian name, and I'm half Indian and half French, and my parents added the e at the end exactly to make it more French. So Sonali is very appropriate. Um, the other way that people say it is obviously the more kind of Indian way, and sometimes with different pronunciations. But yes, it's a name that has always brought questions. It means gold in Sanskrit.
Oh, it's such a beautiful name, and I love it that it's so particular to you.
Oh,
So
that's very
that's
kind.
wonderful. And of
There
course,
aren't as many around. There was a very famous Bollywood actress called Sonali. Well, she's still around. Sorry, Sonali Bendre, but she was extremely famous in the 80s and 90s in India. So it went through a bit of a popular iteration, but overall, it is not one of the more common Indian names, I must say.
well, it matches your hair. I didn't know that it was gold, but I'm now it matches your hair, which is wonderful. Very briefly, before we break down kind of the train wreck and disaster, but with some bright spots of 2023 and get into 2024. Since we're talking about names, maybe we should tell everybody that you're about to name something new. Do you have any names in mind?
You are getting the scoop, Elizabeth. I have not said this live anywhere, I think, but yes, in a couple of months, I'm going to welcome a new baby, um, a little girl this time. I have a little boy already.
Oh,
So, yes, 2024 is definitely going to be different. But being the workaholic and food and climate obsessive that I am, I don't think I will be kept away from the action too long. But I will, um, you know how people always say that you need to kind of find a balance. Well, I'm
mhm.
kind of one of those people that thinks that in different phases in your life, you just have different focuses. And so I still think that you can do many different things. Basically, your life is going to look different in different phases. And right now, my life looks a lot like work and children, and I'm okay with that.
Right
But
now, my life looks a lot like travel and adventure and backpacks.
and I would like that to be my life one day, but it's not going to be right now, you know? And I think
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
yeah,
I'm so excited that you're doing this journey.
yeah. It's been wonderful, as everybody maybe knows, because I took the holiday to let my LinkedIn feed be all about personal pictures and travel pictures. So I finally left Indonesia after spending incredible times. I don't know if you've seen it, Sonalie, but diving with
Amazing.
manta rays. We just accidentally
Saw
fell.
orangutans.
Oh, the orangutans. Oh my God, they were so
Oh,
and proboscis monkeys and Komodo dragons and pit vipers, electric neon green, teal green pit vipers. I mean, just it was
incredible.
magical. Indonesia's magical, and I just arrived in Sri Lanka, so I'm loving it here. The lush vegetation and the tropical, really still raw. Like my room just looks out onto the jungle. It's just I'm loving it here. I can't believe I have internet.
It's funny because in Western media, we focus a lot on the Amazon rainforest, right? but actually it's good, you're in the other part of the world with lots of rainforest. I mean, Borneo, which is part Philippines, part Malaysia, part Indonesia, has some of the most biodiverse rainforest in the world, which you've
Yes.
now seen. And
Yes.
so it's just as important to protect that rainforest, and to celebrate that diversity.
Yeah. Yeah, Indonesia right behind Brazil in terms of biodiversity for rainforest and tropical forests. So when I went to see the orangutans on Borneo, as you state, that was the second largest tropical forest in the world, and therefore the second largest in deforestation. So, but it's very hard. I saw this, even though it's protected land where the orangutans are, on one side of the river, and on the other side of the river, the tropical forest, you can hear them cutting down trees. And yet it's hard to say, hey, I've dropped in here, me with my Western life. We're damaging the planet because we're stuffing ourselves with meat. But you stop cutting down trees. It's hard to really take that perspective. A lot of these people this is their livelihood and it's all they've ever known. So this gotta, coming out of COP, which we'll get into, it really is important to have all those voices reflected from around the world, because it's not like we're not damaging the planet over in North America. So it's easy to point at Brazil and Indonesia, but it's a global phenomenon, obviously.
Of course. And 6% of products that you get at the supermarket contain palm oil. And palm oil is the main reason that we're destroying the Indonesian rainforest. But it's very complicated. And palm oil is also an incredibly important ingredient that's very difficult to replace. And it's not something we can just say we're going to stop tomorrow. So, I think, like with a lot of things I think we're going to talk about, is there a way to rethink how we do things rather than just say we can't do this?
Yes, and that doesn't work anyway.
That doesn't work. Exactly. It makes people angry. It binarizes everything. Okay, I just made up that word. That's not a word.
It's a little tone deaf. It's tone deaf to come in and say like, oh, you stop doing your thing. But here I am with my burger, fries, and shake, still woofing it down. So it's a more subtle conversation, which is why I was over the moon about COP. And I want to get into your take on COP as well. I know you've had some articles on it, obviously posting like I was every day, twice a day. But you were kind enough to ask me to give some quotes, and you asked others as well. So I'd love your take. But before we do that, break down 2023 for me from your perspective. What did you think of that year?
I think it was a year of kind of just putting one foot in front of the left and getting on with it, but it wasn't a year of great achievement or great big new beginnings. It felt very much kind of wait and see. All the conversations I was having, right, were, the fiscal and the financial environment has changed. Also, in that last part of the year, we got another major war. We already have one major war happening in Europe and Central and Russia, Ukraine. So that's happening still. It was a year of very, very extreme weather as well, partly because of El Nino, which is a warming weather phenomenon. So there was a lot of kind of bad news, right? And also a lot of anticipation for 2024, which is a huge year politically, right? 40 major elections around the world in major countries that are going to decide a lot of things, especially climate and food policy. So I just felt that 2023 was like a holding pattern, like a wait and see, with probably overall more negativity than positivity. And of course, in our sector, it wasn't fun.
No.
We can get into that in more detail, but it was not the most positive year for protein diversification.
Actually, I think I'll say that if you are a business that was treading water and you're still alive as we walk into 2024, good for you. That for me is a huge accomplishment. If you were able to keep your head above water and live to tell and for 2024. So I feel like that's good. I feel that, with that sort of uncertainty, unlevel playing field, angst, even fear globally around the world, generally for daily life as we know it. It's hard to run any kind of business strategy against that general zeitgeist. So I'm hoping, I'm not sure that this is the case, but I'm hoping that 2023 was a year of reflection. What went wrong? What can we learn from it? Introspection, how to get grounded, because when you're on unstable ground, you have to figure out how to navigate those waters. I'm not sure 2024 is going to be any more stable. We've got, as you say, elections around the world. The US, clearly one of them that's going to be vitriolic, to say the least. So, it could be another year of nail biting. And how do you, again, live to tell to get to 2025, which I think is really the goal, is get through 2024. There's going to be some bright spots in 2024. We'll talk about it. But I think it's still going to be a tricky year. So do you think it was a year of introspection as we saw so many businesses in the plant-based space fold?
That's a really good question. If I'm honest, I don't think that sometimes there's enough introspection in our sector. So I think that because of all the circumstantial and contextual environment, some of which is our own fault, it was like there was overhype, there were some wrong moves made in the sector, there was a lack of focus on demand and consumers, but some of it was nobody's fault, right? Just macroeconomic challenges. I think people did start to ask a lot of questions. I'm not sure there was enough introspection, though. I'm going to be curious about what lessons were actually learned. Because there's a difference between kind of going, why is this happening and what can we do? And really having that deeper introspection.
I feel like the one lesson people have at least heard enough to be able to parrot back. Now, whether they've been able to process this internally is something else, but they've understood, I believe, the concept of profitability and that it has to make business sense for it to actually work long term. Now, still, there's a level of skill that's required to be able to execute on that kind of plan. So that's different than just having money come from the sky, regardless of any profitability numbers that may or may not transform into reality. So I think there's a eagerness to learn that lesson. And if anything, just to survive. And the rest of it, I agree with you. We'll see if there's any strength that comes out of the difficulty of 2023.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of startups that I spoke to felt a little abandoned by VCs.
Right.
Whereas VCs felt, well, they have to answer to LPs, and it's time to get serious about, as you said, things like profitability. However, I also feel that one thing that came out of 2023 was a widening of the sector, where before protein diversification was really kind of living on its own, in its own kind of vacuum. It felt like we were wedging back into the bigger sustainable food, climate, and food space. And the wedge wasn't always comfortable. And it wasn't necessarily always welcome. I find it hysterical that there's so many climate tech communities and groups that still don't include food. But it is 2023 after all. But it wasn't always an easy marriage, let's say, or an easy kind of insertion. But I think there was this understanding that actually we can't just live out here in our own world. We need to kind of plug back in to the greater sustainable food world. And I think COP was a nice coda to that.
Yeah. So I'll say for my work that I do at VegTech Invest, that was a huge highlight of 2023. And I was really felt like, okay, we're finally in the right place at the right time. Because when we started our ETF in the public markets, that was 2022, and the sector was still riding high off of 2021. They hadn't quite understood what was about to happen to them. And so they just sort of looked at me like, oh my God, what are you doing on Wall Street? Like, come back to the bubble where we're all thriving. And I was like, this bubble's going to burst. And if we really want systems change, because I just don't want one or two startups to make it and then those people to make a lot of money and look like heroes in the press. I really want systems change. And if you want systems change, you're going to have to work well with others. You're going to have to incorporate supply chains. You're going to have to work through all major food companies, distributors and ingredients and flavor texture companies. You're going to have to start reaching outside your bubble and the VC bubble. And you're going to need to bring in big capital like Wall Street. This is a big theme at COP28, that blended finance of philanthropic capital, private and venture capital, public markets and governments. And it's going to have to be all hands on deck. And so you're going to have to start playing well with others and therefore talking the talk of others and being responsible for things like profitability and start making business sense and all these things. And so for me, it was great to see, like, at COP, this happened too. I spent 50% of my time with our sector, but I spent 50% of my time and my speaking engagements were outside of our sector, because most of the speaking I do now is outside of the sector, to the financial community and to the climate research community, et cetera. And it was interesting to see the conversations I was having with folks outside of our sector. They were all really focused on goals and how we're going to do this. And our sector likes to talk about, like, who's failing, who's starting, so we do still have this fascination with ourselves. And I think it's
navel gazing needs to go.
Yeah, really, really. And it's not always a good use of everyone's time. So even though I know a lot of people were like, even a mutual friend of ours, Arena, she was saying, like, what is it that you do? Like 2 years in, she's like, what? Wall Street? What? And I think folks are probably now starting to understand, like, oh, it's actually a really important part of the equation. So that felt great in 2023. And I'll say another highlight of 2023 was food service. Doesn't always get the big headlines. It's so much easier to be Bloomberg and have a headline that's, dissing on everything. But the reality is lots of parts of plant-based were doing really well, like universities, cafeterias, hospitals, Sodexo, Aramark doubling their goals for 2025, doubling their plant-based from about 22 and 24% respectively to 42 and 44%. There's some good highlights. So I'm not all negative on 2023.
Yep, and I think we should unpack that a little bit. Yeah, and certainly Bloomberg loves its Schadenfreude about protein diversification, which feels oftentimes a little bit murky on the journalism ethics side. But nevertheless, on the food service side, I think our lack of focus on the wins that are happening across the world in food service is an example of the limitations of the navel gazing of our sector that you're talking about. And this kind of just, we're living too much in our bubble. And that's why we really do need to get that, wedge ourselves into sustainable food, because we need to have better metrics for impact. And very honestly, moving huge food service companies to be providing, a majority of plant-based options is actually a much bigger impact than, one brand getting, 0.5% in sales boost on a shelf.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of the things. Go ahead. Sorry. No, please go ahead.
Well, I think that the media gets too focused on the brand stories, right? And we did the brand story way before we understood the fundamentals, and honestly, way before we really understood the consumer. And this has been my bugaboo for 3 years, where I've just been saying, why are we not talking to the consumer and understanding what they want? And so we've lionized a few brands, which has ended up in this narrative that overemphasizes a few players in a space where, especially in plant-based, where you're looking at 1,000 brands across the world. So it's hardly just, 2 brands that make the news all the time. And we've kind of lost sight of how to measure impact at a bigger scale. And food service is such a great example of the big impact that is possible and that is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So much to unpack there. First of all, what I love about food service is it takes the ego out of it. So you don't have the brand and you don't have the on shelf and you don't have the look at me, but you save on your production costs because you don't have all the branding, you don't have all the marketing on shelf. You don't even have the packaging. You just, you can 30-pound bags of barbecue can just get to the University of Carolina. I mean, these kinds of South Carolina. I mean, and I love that brand, by the way. And so, there's just a lot of like, let's make the numbers work. Let's get plant-based food into the hands of the next generation. So universities obviously going Gen Z, millennials, well, Gen Z. So I think it's a better business equation. You don't have to compete for shelf space. You don't have to pay for shelf space. And it focuses on the business aspect, which, I think our press kind of reflects that navel gazing focuses less on the hero founder and the big raise of X million dollars and more on the business and just focus on the work. And I'm hoping that's a lesson that comes out of 2023. I know from VegTech Invest, I'll just say our thesis has always been, the real money to be made is in the supply chain. And so I think we're going to see the development of the supply chain, this is another point of 2023, went without the big press releases, but I saw a lot of investment, CapEx spending into the supply chain. Companies like Givaudan's a publicly traded company outside of Switzerland, 100 years old. There are good actors in the food industry that are doubling down on cultivated meat or plant-based innovation. Cultivated meat in Switzerland for Givaudan. They've got a plant-based innovation hub in Seattle, and the majority of their business is focused on flavor and texture, making plant-based items better. So companies like that have the distribution, the advertising budgets, the global teams, they're spending big on their own internal CapEx so that when food turns around, they're ready to be positioned well. So I think that's interesting to see a focus come off of, like you say, the brands and see it more on the supply chain, which we've always thought is the area that needs to be built out where the money is.
Absolutely. And all those big companies, Bueller, Givaudan, etc., AAK, they have not stopped investing into plant-based solutions, flavors, textures, extracts. And that is because it's very, once again, going back to the numbers, and we can unpack why there's such a focus in our sector on brands in a second. But going back to the numbers, we will not be able to achieve any of the net zero decarbonization and lower emission goals without actually moving the needle on scope 3 emissions. And that means transitioning more of the supply chain to be plant-based across the world. So I think those big companies, they see the writing on the wall, and they're aware of that. But if we want to take a moment and understand why our sector is so focused on the big brand story, I think it's because of the tech and food tech. And so the way we've been covered as a sector in the media has very much been reflective of kind of, we're another tech heavy sector, which I think 2023 was also a big year of realization that food is not tech. And that maybe kind of aligning ourselves too much with tech just wasn't working out in terms of valuations, in terms of like growth multiples, in terms of just, understanding that for many of these businesses, they're CPG brands. They are not software businesses. And so I think that really held us back a little bit, that kind of tech affiliation where we lionize these, founders that are going to change the world, et cetera, et cetera.
I am very interested to see now, as we kind of talk about 2024, how that particular conversation plays out in 2024. I actually think it's going to be a yes and not an either or. And by that, I mean, I don't know that we're going to trade tech for the food as much as we're going to say the tech is in the supply chain. So what I like to tell people when I'm talking to, Wall Street, like steak, martinis, and cigars. So people who eat steak 3 times a week, I always tell them, your steak is not going away, so there's no need to panic. Now it's how we make your steak. That's where the tech is. That's what's going to change. But your steak, the good food that you love, not going away. So I think there's two stories to be played there, because there is a technological play in the how and also in the supply chain that's going to better the business equation. Right now, meat, as we know, is an awful cost of goods sold. It takes a long time to make. It requires land and water and deforestation and time and pesticide, antibiotics, hormones. These things take a lot of resources. Now, if you can shorten that supply chain and it's better for business, and you do that through some technological advancements, there's still a tech angle, but we don't lean on that for the dinner plate. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sector, once again, needs to start living under the greater sustainable food sector. And even those big supply chain companies that you're talking about, they do not, Wall Street doesn't see them as tech companies. Wall Street sees them as food companies. And there's nothing wrong with being a food company. And we can't survive without food companies. And food companies require technology, but they are not technology necessarily first, right? In the sense that, with the exception of things like, for example, cultivated meat, right? But even then, the narrative around cultivated meat has taken a real hit this year because of the imposition of this kind of tech first attitude. Whereas to me, cultivated meat really should have been looked at much more like biotech, and vaccine development from the 70s and 80s, rather than silicon chips.
Yes, and I agree with that.
So I think that, again, the word tech is a catch-all, but I think we need to stop looking at food, in the lens of software businesses, and looking at, and VCs need to stop doing that too, and they've had to stop doing that. They've been forced to stop doing that. But we also need to separate out different subsectors. So a plant-based brand, a lot of the time, is not a tech-heavy business. It can be if there's, specific IP that was developed. Impossible is a great example of that. They developed the heme that made their burger, tech forward. But,
with IP
extruded soy chicken chunks is not necessarily like a majorly tech forward business. And so it can't be priced as such, or analyzed as such, or rolled out as such, right? Like, I think there was this kind of vision that we were gonna, a lot of SaaS software is based on, economies of scale and kind of the freemium model, where eventually people start paying regularly. And I think there was this kind of hope that we were just going to put some of these products on the shelf, and it was just going to start rolling in every month like a subscription. And that's not how food is bought or conceived of by the consumer. And again, it came a lot from this kind of not having spent enough time with the consumer, with the end buyer. And whether it's food service, where your end buyer is the chef or the food prep person, or whether your end buyer is the mom at the grocery store, right? Or the busy professional looking to feed themselves on a Tuesday night, those people are not the same as people buying a, SaaS product to optimize their advertising, on their website. It's just, so I think we lost something there.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of really VCs. Wall Street isn't there yet. They don't know the difference of like plant-based processing, cultivated meat, fermentation. I mean, that's the work that I do out there, is trying to help them understand what's happening. They're not that detailed yet. But the VCs, the ones that I talk to, really do see synbio, synthetic biology, much more than like a SaaS product, I would say. So they're still focused on what kind of IP moat do you have, because you don't have one with extruded seitan or something. So I think there's that focus, but definitely we talk about it a lot on this show. Beyond Meat was valued as a tech company, and it had the same valuations that the tech bubble did in the early 2000s, if you remember that. So dating myself here, about 20 years ago. It had the same kind of valuations that bubble had. And then, of course, came down to reality as it is primarily a food company, period. And there are other things at play there. So if people are interested in that, I encourage them to go back to a previous podcast where I talk about beyond what happened, what's good, what's still at play, and how Wall Street is looking at that company. And it isn't the parroting that we say Beyond Meat is a mismanaged company, period. That's propaganda from the meat company. It's much more subtle than that. Some of it their fault and some of it not their fault. And so there's a whole conversation. So I hope you'll go back to that podcast. But I agree with what you're saying. The messaging to the consumer got very confusing. And I think it comes from not understanding that consumer. And in fairness to the consumer, they're bombarded with so much information and misinformation. I'm surprised I understand anything at this point. So what do you think communication will be like for the sector in 2024? Because there's going to be continued misinformation from the meat lobby.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between what I think it should be and, what I hope is going to happen.
More of a prediction. Where do you think?
I don't feel that we have enough of that talent yet in the space in terms of excellent brand builders, more behavioral experts, so behavioral science kind of learnings. There are a few people and a few organizations doing some fantastic work. People like Food for Climate League, Greener by Default. There are some, obviously, there's always some outstanding talent, but overall, I don't see the investment in comms that I think there should be, or it's an overinvestment where there's a fancy CMO for a company that doesn't even have a product on a shelf. Is that necessary? Likely not. And I think there's a confusion between all the brands that I talk to are like, oh, well, we really need to build up the sector as a whole to the consumer. But no one's really willing to do that work all together, right? And that's the work that, industry associations do. So there have been a few rumblings and a few kind of semi-launches of industry associations and groups that are going to maybe try and do something. And I'm hoping that there's a lot more kind of that where happening in 2024. We absolutely need a better narrative as a whole. We need to be better organized as a sector. We need to decide a narrative that is more cohesive globally, but also for each subsector. So that needs to happen. I think we also have to learn that there are certain technologies where it's not yet on the shelf, where there's no need to do end consumer work yet. I don't know that the average grocery shopper really needs to understand cultivated meat in depth today. I think maybe in 5 years, once there's a product on the shelf that we can really market. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think a lot of comms also, there's a confusion between the comms that are aimed at essentially fundraising,
Yes.
right? And what should be aimed at the consumer. And I've seen this a lot in, because I get press releases all the time. And sometimes I just feel, is this a press release for a consumer, or is the win here to get the attention of VCs?
Yes.
And that kind of confused things, right? And so I think a lot of the comms people and marketing people in the brands I don't know sometimes who are they told to aim for?
Yeah, well, and therein lies the problem, I think, because when you're writing a press release for VCs or for funding, then you get caught up in that story, which is, I'm saving the world and I'm this big hero. I mean, VCs like to see a founder, and they like to see a strong founder and a particular kind of founder. So now you're into kind of personality shaping, if you will, or it's not really focused on the business. And as you say, and we've talked about this before, I'm very excited in 2024 to see more mergers and acquisitions. And I know that people find that disappointing because they say, oh, I wanted this small little brand, the little engine that could, to make it on their own and not be dirtied, if you will, by a large food company, but there are good actors out there in the food sector. And I just don't think our sector, which has, you're talking about huge goals, Sonalie, we're going to have to rechange the messaging of the whole sector. That means coming together as a sector. Well, we can't do that because we're too focused on cutting each other down. I'm sorry to be so blunt, everyone, but I just see it all the time. It's why I'm spending less and less time in the sector. Honestly, I do the Plant-Based Business Hour, and then I spend my time everywhere else because I'm losing confidence in the sector, given how it chooses to spend its time on each other. So I'm literally looking for the mergers and acquisitions where we can get distribution channels, big budgets, and some expertise in food. Oh, and by the way, some expertise in finance. And hopefully, this is my hope, I'm not sure, harness the passion and the vision of the founder. And if these two things could come together in mergers and acquisitions, more time than not, won't always happen. Sometimes they'll crush the founder and they'll get rid of them and the whole thing will be over. But if that merger and marriage can happen, I'd be over the moon. And I'm hoping in 24 to see lots of positive mergers and acquisitions. We're writing a paper on it right now at VegTech. So that's my prediction. That's my stay positive, Elysabeth, on the Plant-Based Business Hour prediction for 2024. Despite awful elections and, I don't think climate change is going to be solved in 2024. So it's going to remain very scary place in that perspective. I am hopeful that, and this is, we can talk about COP, that food is going to be what we left COP with, which is, it's the low-hanging fruit. It's the way to impact climate change much faster than electric vehicles, alternative energy. Let's focus on food. And if the world really does that, 2024 could be a beautiful year of merger and acquisitions. That's my prediction. What about you?
Well, I actually, one of the things that I was reading some analysis by some VCs in space, in the general VC space, and then more specifically in the climate and food space. And one of the comments was by one investor who said that they were actually surprised by how few acquisitions or mergers happened in 2023.
I'm hoping for more.
Right. And I mean, do you agree with that? Do you feel like did you think there would be more, given the difficulties in fundraising and, the lack of runway for a lot of the startups?
No, I didn't. I thought 2023 would be too early for mergers and acquisitions. 2023 was the year that people got smacked around. 2024 is going to be the year. This is more maybe hope than certainty, but I think 2024 is going to be the year of mergers and acquisitions, and it might not be the small little brand that never really got off the ground. And in that way, I've personally stopped impact investing in angel and venture, and I'm just focusing on the public markets because, to invest your money and then see the brand fold like so many did, not only have you lost 100% of your money, but you've had no impact. So, it might not be that little baby brand that never really got off the ground. That's probably not the merger and acquisition that's going to happen. It's going to be the more they're at a Series C or, and they just need more help. And, that level of company, I think, is going to be the company that goes through mergers and acquisitions. I think the little baby brands are going to die. I'm sorry.
Interesting. I actually was surprised that more baby brands didn't die. I mean, I think I think you said this earlier, but more people survived than I thought would.
Yes, me too.
Especially like after the summer. I thought after the summer there'd be a bigger cull. But and that's another thing that one of the VCs I was reading was saying, are VCs indulging certain startups too much?
Yes, they don't want it to die from their portfolio. So they're sort of subsidizing them, which is what we criticize the meat company for. If the meat industry for, if the business can't stand on its own 2 feet, then why are we subsidizing? And I do feel that way a little bit for the small brands, but these are extraordinarily odd times. And so I do think they're propped up, but I'm not sure that it's fair to say they didn't deserve it, need it, that there isn't a good reason.
I mean, this is where there's the added kind of mission and impact dimension that probably adds a layer of complexity. But eventually we need to figure out which businesses have the fundamentals and can
Right.
survive.
Right. 100%. Yeah. And I do think, we criticize lovingly, let's say, some of the startups, but it's VCs too. I mean, I don't know that I would say VCs are doing it for mission impact. I think they're also doing it for their portfolios, and they're saying, well, I'm not going to refund everybody, but I'm going to refund some and keep them alive, because I've got to keep some of my portfolio alive, and I'm going to, prop up what I think is the best option. So, they're doing it for themselves as well, which I get and understand, and for the mission, as you say. But this is why I was so jazzed, but not surprised, by the messaging that came out of COP28. Because again, I was seeing in 2023 lots of great things taking place without the press releases. So food service booming, and lots of capex spending from big publicly traded companies, and lots of companies, Bunge, ADM, Ingredion, Givaudan, AB InBev, positioning themselves, getting their feet solid in the sand. I like to see that. Even smaller companies, Jensen Meats, looking at acquisitions. I mean, I think I'm excited about that for 2024. And that's why when COP kind of solidified this messaging around food is a tool we have at our disposal to impact deforestation, biodiversity loss, and climate. Why are we not doing it? Oh, and by the way, food, feeding people, food insecurity. I don't know if you saw this coming out. I saw it after COP. Did you see the call to action of non-governmental food systems activists? That's not really the right word. It's businesses, but non-governmental NGOs signing a food systems change for people call to action. Did you see that?
I don't think I saw that.
Let me see if I can bring it up on my screen, because I'd like everyone to see it, including Sonalie. VegTech Invest signed yesterday. It comes from Climate Champions, so they are kind of another offshoot of the UN. Let's see if I can scroll down for you, but I'll send it to you, Sonalie. It'll be in the blog post. But protecting people, nature, and climate for people. So transforming food systems for people, which, you don't always hear. And of course we signed, and anyone can sign. So I'll send this link to people. It's climatechampions.unfccc. I'll put it in the public chat. But anyone can sign this call to action that talks about food systems change that aren't government. So coming out of COP28, of course, there was so much discussion about 154 countries signing the declaration on food, agriculture, and climate resiliency. And those are countries, and that was a big deal. But now individuals can also have their voices be heard, as well as non-governmental companies. So thought I'd bring that to everyone's attention. What were some of the highlights coming out of COP for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think COP for me was split into two different outcomes. I think, the wider world was really focused on that the kind of phasing out or phasing down fossil fuels, right? And so I think from that point of view, it was really a mixed bag of a result, and kind of, to be honest, not entirely unexpected, given that it was a COP organized by and held in a petro state. So make of that what you will, in terms of, I think legitimately lots of people were very disappointed that it wasn't an entire kind of phase down. But I also think there were limits to what was going to be achieved given the context. So that's separate to me than my more personal kind of outcome, which is the food and climate conversation. And that for me was a different thing. And I had different goals for that. For me, the goal was to see whether food was really going to make it onto the menu, so to speak. And while there were no exact commitments, and while the wording was still far from where I wanted it to be, I certainly did feel that COP28 delivered food being on the menu. And having spoken, it was my first COP, having spoken to multiple people who had been at the last two previous COPs, so Sharm el Sheikh and Glasgow, it felt that what I was being told was it was a huge difference. And it
Huge.
felt like there were thousands of people from the food system, all different parts of the food system. And this goes back to our earlier conversation about protein diversification needs to wedge into the bigger food conversation. But it certainly felt like conversations were being had, things were being discussed, ideas were being shared, solutions were being showcased, and food was undeniably up there on the global stage as something that needs to be solved if we're going to get to our Paris Agreement goals, or even, I think those have been breached, but even like a 2-degree or 3-degree max. And
3 degrees.
I don't think that that was clear before going into COP. And I mean, it still isn't for the average bear, right? For the average bear, you still really have to make that connection to them about food and climate. But I do feel COP opened up that discussion. And so as someone who spent, over 10 years of my life in food and climate, it felt very empowering to see food up there on the big global stage.
I'll tell you, it felt life affirming for me. I was like, oh my God, I've been talking about this for so long and you're finally getting it. I mean, it was wonderful. I just want to follow up like a little mouse on some of the things that you said so that people understand what you're saying. So when you say that some of the wording wasn't strong enough, you're referring to the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization roadmap, as well as the global stock take, which is just kind of like it sounds, a kind of summary of where we are. We've got 12 days of panels in over 100 buildings, and it's panels every 45 minutes. You can imagine the kind of knowledge drop that happens at COP28. So there's a document that kind of, as we're halfway through, Paris Accords, we're halfway through to 2030. So there was time to take like, okay, where are we and what are we doing? And the global stock take gave a weak nod to protein diversification through the need of less inefficient food systems for climate and better efficiency for feeding people. So, we know that that's going to be protein diversification, but they didn't come out and say it. And the same was true for the FAO. So the wording was weak, but I felt really positive that it was addressed at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I don't go into the wording is because I think there are 7 different major documents or texts, and I sometimes feel like if you weren't in the minutia and the day-to-day, or you're not a policymaker, maybe you're not following it closely. But overall, the point was really that the word food made it into some big texts. Sustainable food made it in. Unfortunately, the focus was a lot more on mitigation than adaptation, which was a bit of a disappointment for those of us in the industry. And the word specifically, like for example, ideas like meat reduction in global north countries, that wording did not make it into the final cut. But I think there were certainly, it was a really, really, as you say, empowering, life affirming start. It is absolutely a start. It is by no means the end, and it should only re-encourage and redirect our focus to kind of go from here. But it did feel like somewhat of an ideological win to have food be on the menu, where previously it literally wasn't.
I'm going to go ahead and play 2 short videos. I know, Sonalie, I believe you've seen at least one, the What's Cooking video from the UNEP. Have you seen that? Okay, well, we'll see okay, let's see if I can, bear with me, folks, as hopefully everyone can see this. Let me just get to the screen. Hold on. I really want everyone to see this. So just bear with me, everybody, as I do some back end stuff right now. Let's see if I can do it. You can, Elysabeth, you can.
for animal source foods is rising. The demand for animal source foods is rising. They provide important nutrients, but their production and consumption, especially in industrial and intensive systems in middle and high-income countries, negatively impact people and the planet. Food systems contribute to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, while animal products make up nearly 60% of food-related emissions. We can work to make animal agriculture more sustainable, but it is also important to explore new options. Emerging alternatives include plant-based products, cultivated meat, and fermentation-derived foods. Novel alternatives could help reduce the impacts of animal source food production systems, but more research is needed to understand their nutritional sufficiency and benefits to human health. Policymakers can support open and transparent research to help evaluate these technologies and their potential environmental, health, and social impacts, while ensuring that any transition in animal agriculture systems is fair and does not undermine food security or deepen inequality. We must make informed, equitable choices for our future.
That comes from the United Nations Environmental Program. What's cooking? The what's cooking on the future food. I don't know. I thought that to be unbelievable that they're mentioning fermented proteins, plant-based proteins, cultivated meat, and they're calling out animal agriculture for 18% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And that came right out of COP.
Absolutely. And there was a lot of coverage post basically saying the food COP, food finally at COP. There were a lot of these type of headlines. So, even random people that are not in the industry, mentioned it to me. So I think that there was a connection made. Again, just to start. Again, nowhere near where we're looking to get to. But I do think it's okay to take a moment and go, well, that was something. And kudos to the thousands, tens of thousands of people from all over the world and organizations like GFI and ProVeg and so many more that worked tirelessly to get these to in the background to really get that progress.
Yeah, I want to share what.
Where 2/3 of the food served at COP was plant-based and delicious.
I know I had some great shawarma, plant-based shawarma. It's great. I want to share one more video, which was a huge highlight for me. I don't know if you've seen this, Sonalie, but it is Her Excellency Mariam Al-Harari. Just give me a second, folks, while I figure this out again, back end. But she is sitting, for those of you who are listening on audio only, she is sitting with Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. And to hear what she says and to hear him agree, this meat guy, you kind of won't believe it. I'm only going to play the first 2 minutes of this. But I'll send the link, and if you want to go ahead and listen, you'll hear him agree with her.
We really wanted to make sure.
Oh, shoot.
How many pounds of vegetables can we grow in 4 square feet of space? 2 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds.
We really wanted to make sure we walk the talk and we take that consumer approach of saying we need to also, we're talking about food and ag many years, many COPs, but what about the food that's being served at the COP? So we actually took that step to train chefs, suppliers, catering companies. A month before COP happened, we did a 4-day workshop, and the chefs were so surprised to know that their decisions have a huge impact on climate change. They were not aware of this. And this is, as I said, just the beginning. And we made sure that here at COP28, there is climate conscious food. I know a lot of the vegans and vegetarians out there are very happy because I think 60% of the food is plant-based here. I know a lot of my team members who are not necessarily vegetarians, but for them, it was an eye-opener to see how good plant-based food also tastes. But as you know, we have the bigger issue that Secretary Vilsack and I always think about day on day. As population is rising, will we have enough food? Will we have enough protein for all? So that's why technologies and innovations are so good. We need to look at a lot of the alternatives as well, alternatives that are more sustainable, that don't need so much water, that don't need so much land, that don't throw out any methane emissions. And that's why things like alternative proteins are very important. And getting consumer awareness around portion size, about what they're actually eating, about making sure they're not throwing anything away, all comes into the consumer behavior. Because as much as we do on the supply side, the demand side is actually so strong as well. And that's where each and every one of us has a role to play. So you can say, yeah, the governments are doing stuff, the private sector are doing stuff, but what are you doing? And I think you've seen all the little questions and highlights around COP28, just reminding us why we're here.
So, I mean, her calling out alternative proteins on the stage at COP28 with Secretary Vilsack, and him agreeing. And there's, if you listen to the next 4 minutes of the video, he goes on to say, we need all hands on deck. We can no longer say no to any innovation or any. So he doesn't name alternative proteins, protein diversification, doesn't name anything, but he goes on to say we need innovation and we need it now and we need all options. So to see the two of them, I actually think the two of them are going to go down in history, sort of like a Laurel and Hardy or like a Penn and Teller. I mean, they're just such an odd couple, and how well they get along is fun to see. But that was a huge highlight for me at COP. I don't know, have you seen that before, Sonalie?
Yep, I believe I saw it because you shared it.
Yes, probably. It was I was in the audience watching the two of them, and to have her call out right there in front of a huge group of people, alternative proteins, it was very exciting. So, it is on the menu, as you say, and I think it's going to be a real, it's going to change. It's going to be the line in the sand where we can point to, oh yeah, things really changed because of COP28. And from there on, everything was different.
Absolutely.
Okay, so as we round up, I just want to ask you kind of for yourself, as you kind of look at 2024, you're going to take some time off, I think.
A little bit, yeah, I am. But I have an amazing team. So there shouldn't be much of an interruption in terms of what Green Queen is doing.
Okay, well, this is probably a bit of an introspective time for you. I mean, having another baby, obviously that's going to change your life dramatically, and it's such a beautiful moment and so much joy and happiness around that. Having one baby under your belt, so to speak, is there anything that you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
I think I don't believe that I had enough of the courage of my convictions 10 years ago. I don't think that I trusted my gut enough. I think that I was too hesitant and too cautious to do things that I knew were right. So I did them, but I did them very cautiously, and I didn't celebrate them enough, and I didn't lean in enough because I honestly had just been brainwashed to think that there was a certain way you had to live your life and a certain focus you had to have with your career. And I do feel that I was, really ahead of the curve on understanding that food was going to be one of the most important things to dedicate your life to. Like, I think this is over 15 years ago now. And I didn't trust my gut enough on that. So what I wish that I'd known was, I see 25-year-olds today, and they're so committed, and they're so sure that their mission is the right one. And I think I really had that, post 80s neoliberal capitalist hangover on my head. And that really got in the way of me doing bigger things earlier on.
Yeah, I also think, people always say to me like, oh, I can't believe you let your hair go silver and you're not dyeing it anymore. And you don't want people to think you're old. And, I always say like, hey, dude, there are actually some positives to growing older. And one of them is finding the strength of your own voice. So I think part of, I do see 25-year-olds with conviction, but I also think part of it is growing into your own voice that comes naturally with age. So cool to hear you say that and to see how you use your voice now. I mean, just so wonderful and powerful. Okay, but not every day is a sunshine day. So if you're having a bad day, is there a phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
I'm not a catastrophizer. I think there are some days where it's just not working out. You're just having a bad day. And I'm very comfortable to say, I will say it out loud. I'll say this. In fact, yesterday was that day. And I said it out loud. I said, I'm having a bad day. I woke up on the wrong side bed. Maybe I didn't sleep well. It was January 2nd.
Okay.
Right. And I don't know. I think I just didn't sleep well. And so it just set up a bad day. And I was doing a lot of catching up and errands and things it was just one of those days. And I think instead of, I don't kind of like say, okay, well, I don't make more of it than it is, but I also am very open to saying I'm having a bad day today. I don't try and hide that, and I don't make myself feel bad for it. I just go, this is just a crappy day. And then tomorrow it's going to be a better day. And I think that we're always encouraged to kind of paper over our negative feelings. I'm not a big fan. I think it's okay sometimes to just be like, this sucks. That's fine.
It's funny. I think you're the first person who's ever answered that way. Everyone has a phrase, usually like, oh, tomorrow is another day, or one foot in front of the other, or, just take a nap or whatever. But I love what you're saying of just like, no, I'm actually going to call a spade a spade. If it's a bad day, the thing I tell myself is, it's just a bad day. Move on.
That is one of my favorite expressions. I'm just like the anti-delusion police. I cannot lie to myself about any of that. So I just go, yeah, this is a crappy day. And then I laugh about it. I don't know. I think the things that are serious in life are the big things. Having a bad day in a run of, 365 days in a year is not a big deal. But I think that we often are a culture, especially like the kind of wellness and spiritual culture, where you're not allowed to be negative or kind of like be angry or just be in a bad mood. And it's like, actually, animals are in bad moods sometimes. Like it's just, we have moods, and sometimes, and I'll tell you what, having a toddler really teaches you that, because they have bad moods, and then a few hours later they're fine, and that there's no conclusion to be drawn from it, or kind of bigger picture. It's just your moods change up and down. And I think we often catastrophize and make too many big conclusions on something that's just a bad mood. That's, and a lot of times it comes down to like, you didn't sleep well, or you're, or maybe your gut is having issues and it's just affecting your mood, things like that.
Yeah. Well, okay, it's the same day, but this time it's not just that maybe it's the day isn't working out for you, but it's that you're running around, you have no time for lunch. What's your go-to snack? Which might be different now that you're pregnant. I don't know. What's your go-to snack?
Oh man, that's hard. What's my go-to snack? I'm really like a big iced coffee or iced tea person. Like I'm not a huge snacker.
What? Oh, my word.
I'm more of like a big meal person. What's my go-to snack?
Okay, what's your favorite big meal? I'll go with that.
Oh, Elizabeth, you and I shared one of my favorite big meals together. Honestly, a plate, a table full of delicious Middle Eastern dips, whether they are Turkish or Lebanese or Palestinian or Israeli, or I love food from the Levant. I could eat hummus and mutabal and muhammara and pita, fun tip forever, every day. I don't know.
We did go to town. We did.
That was incredible. Yeah, we had this. What an amazing meal we had. Yeah, I love that kind of food. I love dips. I love a variety on a table. I'm not so much of a one main type of person.
I think we'll call that a snack. We'll call a dip a snack.
Yeah, we'll call it a snack. I know. Hummus just feels very, somehow it's been completely, like it's specific. Like I like Levantine hummus, as we talked about, with like made with the proper tahini from Ethiopian sesame seeds, blah, blah.
Yeah. I'd love to make hummus at home.
Yeah.
That always, like, I can no longer really do store-bought hummus. It's
exactly. It has a taste, but also it's the wrong recipe.
right as well.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, people, but most people are making their hummus wrong. There is no olive oil in hummus. There is no canola oil in hummus. There is no cashew in hummus. It's literally just tahini and chickpeas and lemon juice and garlic. That's really it, and some water.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah, and I make it at home. It's really easy,
it's
of course.
Perfect food.
I know. Okay, I know that your day is crazy and mine is as well, and we've gone a little bit over here. So I want to say, Sonalie, as I pronounce your name, thank you for all you do. Thank you for founding Green Queen and being such a source of information all the time. In fact, I recently read a great article that will also be in the blog post from Green Queen. Of course, there are many great articles on Green Queen, but talking about how building up animal populations is actually a climate strategy, because the animals trample and put carbon back into the soil. They also move seeds around, of course, by pooping, and then you have more growth coming up for more carbon sequestration. Stuff we already knew, you and me, but I don't know that the whole world sees it that way. And so really putting animals on the map in terms of an equation for climate change mitigation, I thought was a great focus. So thank you for this and so many articles that you do at Green Queen. Just thank you for all you do at Green Queen. Everybody on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and I guess now Instagram. We'll see later if that actually worked. Thank you for all you do. Happy New Year. Please share this with your friends. Subscribe right now to the Plantbased Business Hour. Also, you might know that I do a podcast as the voice of sustainability for the New York Stock Exchange. My podcast for the New York Stock Exchange is called Upside and Impact: Investing for Change. You can find that also on iTunes, or you can find it on the New York Stock Exchange website. Everybody have a great 2024. Lots of knowledge drops coming from the Plant-Based Business Hour throughout the year. See you next week, everybody. Sonalie, stay put. Everybody else, have a great year.